The courtroom was completely silent. The judge sat calmly on the bench. My 11-year-old disabled daughter was in her wheelchair, holding onto her white service dog like it was her lifeline. Then a woman from the HOA snapped. "Rules are rules," she shouted. "Disabled or not, the law applies to everyone." Before I could even stand up, zap, the sound of a taser echoed through the courtroom. My daughter screamed. Her service dog collapsed to the floor, shaking. People jumped out of their seats. Security froze in shock. And that woman, the HOA Karen, had absolutely no idea where she was standing or who she had just attacked. Because this wasn't just any courtroom. And the woman slowly rising from the bench, removing her glasses, the one staring straight at her with pure, controlled fury, was my wife. And in the next few seconds, that HOA Karen's entire life was about to fall apart. Before we go any further, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this video from right now? New York? Texas? California? Florida? Or maybe a small town no one ever talks about? Go down to the comments and type the name of your city. I read every single one, and I want to know how far this story reaches. Now, before we continue, if you believe in real stories, real emotions, and real justice, make sure you subscribe to this channel right now. Because what you're about to hear isn't fiction. It actually happened, and the ending will stay with you. This story isn't just about an HOA. It's not just about a courtroom, and it's definitely not just about rules. It's about a father trying to protect his disabled child. It's about a service dog that meant the difference between fear and safety. And it's about how power, when mixed with ego, can turn ordinary people into monsters. That day, we walked into court thinking it would be routine. We expected paperwork, arguments, maybe a fine. What we didn't expect was violence. We didn't expect humiliation. And we definitely didn't expect a moment that would change multiple lives forever. Because in less than an hour, one woman's arrogance would collide with the law in the most brutal way possible. And the most shocking part? The woman who held all the power in that courtroom, the one person who could decide how everything ended, was someone the HOA Karen never imagined she was facing. Take a deep breath, because now the real story begins. The morning started like any other court day, but something felt wrong before we even left the house. My daughter, Emily, sat quietly in her wheelchair near the front door. She was 11 years old, small for her age, with fragile legs that had never fully worked the way they were supposed to. She didn't complain, she never did, but I could see the tension in her hands as they rested on the armrests. Her fingers kept tightening, then loosening again and again. Beside her sat Snowy. Snowy wasn't just a dog. He was a fully trained white service dog, calm, intelligent, and deeply connected to Emily. Wherever she went, Snowy went. He knew when her breathing changed. He knew when her muscles locked up. He knew when fear crept in before she ever said a word. That morning, Snowy rested his head gently on Emily's knee, as if he already knew this day was going to test all of us. The lawsuit had been hanging over our heads for months. The Homeowners Association, our HOA, had filed a formal complaint claiming Snowy was an unauthorized animal. They ignored the medical documents. They dismissed the federal protections. They brushed off every letter from Emily's doctor. To them, rules mattered more than reality. To them, Emily wasn't a child with a disability. She was a problem. As a father, I had learned how to control my anger. You have to when you're raising a child who depends on you for calm and stability. But that morning, I felt something darker sitting in my chest. Fear. Not fear of losing the case. We were on solid legal ground. Fear of the people behind it. The HOA representative assigned to the case had a reputation. Everyone in the neighborhood knew her. She had enforced fines on elderly couples for lawn decorations. She had threatened families over trash cans being left out an hour too long. Her real name didn't matter. Everyone called her a Karen. And today, she would be there in person. My wife barely spoke as we drove to the courthouse. She sat in the front passenger seat, reviewing documents on her tablet, calm and focused like she always was before work. She was a judge, experienced, respected, and known for her fairness. Normally, her presence made me feel safe. But today, she wasn't there as my wife. She was there in her professional role. And she had no idea how personal this case was about to become. When we arrived at the courthouse, the building loomed larger than usual. Cold stone, tall steps, heavy doors. Everything about it felt intimidating, especially for a child. Emily swallowed hard as I pushed her wheelchair forward. "Daddy," she whispered, "are they going to take Snowy away?" I stopped walking. I knelt down so we were eye to eye. "No," I said firmly. "No one is taking Snowy. I promise." Snowy lifted his head and nudged Emily's hand, as if to back me up. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Lawyers walked quickly through hallways. Security guards stood stiff near metal detectors. Voices echoed in every direction. Then I saw her. She stood near the courtroom doors, arms crossed, heels planted like she owned the building. Her posture screamed authority, even though she had none there. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, and her eyes immediately locked onto Emily. Not on me, not on the paperwork, on my daughter. Her gaze dropped to the wheelchair, then to Snowy, and her expression changed. Disgust. "That dog isn't supposed to be here," she said loudly, without even introducing herself. Heads turned. I felt Emily stiffen. "He's a registered service animal," I replied calmly, "and this is a federal courthouse." She scoffed. "I don't care what kind of papers you think you have. Rules are rules." Snowy remained perfectly still. Emily's breathing quickened. My wife stepped forward. "Ma'am, this matter will be addressed inside the courtroom." The woman's eyes flicked to my wife, dismissive and sharp. "I hope so," she said, "because I won't allow dangerous animals around residents, especially not around children." That word hit me like a punch. Dangerous. Snowy had never bitten anyone, never barked in public, never shown aggression in his life. But I knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't arguing law. She was asserting control. The courtroom doors opened and we were called inside. As we took our seats, I felt every muscle in my body tense. Emily clutched Snowy's harness, her knuckles pale. The HOA Karen sat only a few rows away, watching us like a hawk watches prey. And that's when I realized something chilling. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't cautious. She wasn't even angry. She was excited, as if she believed she was about to make an example out of us. I leaned down to Emily and whispered, "Stay close to Snowy. You're safe." Snowy pressed against her leg, solid and reassuring. Across the room, the judge had not yet entered, and in those final quiet seconds before everything changed, I had no idea that this woman's need for control was about to explode into violence, or that the next sound anyone would hear in that courtroom would not be a gavel, but a taser. The judge still hadn't entered the courtroom, but the tension was already thick enough to choke on. People whispered in low voices. Papers shuffled. A bailiff stood near the wall, hands folded, watching the room like a hawk. On the surface, everything looked normal. But beneath it, something dangerous was building, and I could feel it in my bones. The HOA Karen hadn't taken her eyes off Emily. Not once. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, lips curled in a tight, self-satisfied smile. Every few seconds, her gaze flicked from my daughter's wheelchair to Snowy's white fur, then back again. It wasn't concern. It wasn't caution. It was calculation. Emily shifted slightly, sensing it too. Snowy responded immediately, moving closer, pressing his body against her leg. His ears were relaxed. His posture was calm. He was doing exactly what he had been trained to do, provide comfort and stability. But to someone like her, calm looked like defiance. I leaned toward my wife. She's staring at Emily. My wife glanced over briefly, her expression unreadable. "I see her. Can you say something?" "She hasn't broken any courtroom rules yet," she said quietly, "but stay alert." That should have been my first warning. Karen suddenly stood up. The sound of her chair scraping against the floor made several people turn. The bailiff looked up surprised. I'm uncomfortable, Karen said loudly, her voice echoing off the walls. That animal is not under control. That's not true, I said immediately, standing halfway out of my seat. He's a trained service dog. She ignored me completely. I don't feel safe, she continued, projecting her voice like she was giving a speech. And I shouldn't have to sit in a courtroom with a dangerous animal present. Snowy didn't move. Emily's breathing grew shallow. I could feel panic rising in her, fast and sharp. My wife stood. Ma'am, sit down. This is a courtroom. Karen turned toward the bench, her chin lifting slightly. With respect, Your Honor, I have the right to protect myself. Protect herself. From an 11-year-old girl in a wheelchair. Something inside me snapped, but I forced myself to stay calm. Losing control would only make things worse. That's how people like her win. The bailiff stepped forward. Ma'am, please return to your seat. Karen hesitated for a moment. Then she sat down, but not without shooting Emily one last glare. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Minutes passed. The judge had still not officially called the session to order. It was procedural delay, nothing unusual. But Karen grew more restless with every passing second. She shifted in her seat. She tapped her foot. She whispered to herself. Then I noticed her hand move toward her purse. At first, I didn't think much of it. People reach into bags all the time. But something about the way she did it, slow, deliberate, sent a chill down my spine. I leaned forward, trying to see. Her fingers wrapped around something solid, metallic. Bailiff. My wife said sharply, her eyes locked on Karen. Is she carrying? It happened too fast. Karen stood up, so abruptly her chair tipped backward. I warned you, she shouted. Before anyone could react. She pulled out a taser. No. I screamed. The sound that followed wasn't loud, but it was unforgettable. Zap! Blue sparks cracked through the air. Emily screamed. Her body jerked in the wheelchair as the current hit her arm. Snowy lunged instinctively, not aggressively, not attacking, just trying to put himself between Emily and the threat. Karen pulled the trigger again. Zap! Snowy collapsed. Time shattered. People were screaming. Someone knocked over a chair. The bailiff lunged forward too late. The smell of burned fabric filled the air. I was on my knees in seconds, gripping Emily, checking her face, her hands, her breathing. Daddy, it hurts, she sobbed. I'm scared. Snowy lay on the floor, shaking, a soft whine escaping his throat. And Karen? She stood there frozen, eyes wide, taser still raised. I thought, she stammered. The dog attacked. He didn't touch you, someone shouted. You tossed a child, another voice screamed. The courtroom was chaos. And then, a voice cut through everything. Cold, controlled, furious. Bailiff. Silence fell instantly. My wife stood up from the bench. Not as my wife. As the judge. Secure the defendant, she said, her voice steady but deadly. Now. Karen turned toward her, confusion twisting into horror as recognition hit her face. Why, Your Honor, I didn't know. My wife stepped down from a bench, and for the first time, emotion cracked through her composure. She looked at Emily, then at Snowy, then back at Karen. You didn't know what? She asked quietly. That assault is illegal? That service animals are protected under federal law? Or that the child you just tossed is my daughter? Karen's knees buckled. The bailiff grabbed her arms as the courtroom erupted again. But this time, the sound wasn't chaos. It was justice arriving. And I knew in that moment, Karen's obsession with control had just destroyed her entire life. For a few seconds after the taser hit, the courtroom didn't sound like a courtroom anymore. It sounded like a disaster zone. People were shouting. Chairs scraped across the floor. Someone was crying loudly near the back. Another person yelled for a medic. The bailiff struggled to restrain Karen as she flailed weakly, her confidence completely gone, replaced by raw panic. But for me, none of that mattered. My entire world had narrowed down to one small space on the floor. Emily, she was shaking uncontrollably, her face pale, tears streaming down her cheeks. I held her close, one arm around her shoulders, the other gripping her hand so tightly I was afraid I might hurt her. "I'm here," I whispered over and over. "I've got you. You're safe. Daddy's here." Her breath came in short, broken gasps. Snowy lay just a few feet away, his white fur smudged with dirt from the floor. His body trembled as if electricity was still running through him. When I called his name, his ears twitched, but he couldn't stand. That sight broke something inside me. Snowy had always been strong, calm, reliable. He had never failed Emily, not once. And now he lay there because someone decided power mattered more than humanity. My wife was suddenly beside us. She had abandoned the bench completely, kneeling on the floor in her judicial robe, hands shaking as she checked Emily's pulse, her breathing, her eyes. In that moment, she wasn't a judge. She was a mother. "Emily, sweetheart, look at me," she said softly, her voice trembling despite her effort to stay composed. "Can you hear me?" Emily nodded faintly. "I need an ambulance." My wife snapped to the bailiff without looking up. "Now. And animal control, no, a veterinary emergency unit. Immediately." "Yes, Your Honor," the bailiff replied, already speaking into his radio. Karen watched all of this from across the room. Her wrists were cuffed now. The taser had been taken from her and placed on a nearby table like a piece of damning evidence, which it was. Her mouth opened and closed as if she wanted to speak, but no words came out. She looked smaller. Not physically, but mentally, like someone who had just woken up inside a nightmare they created themselves. "I didn't mean to," she finally whispered, her voice cracking. "I was scared." My wife stood slowly. The entire room went silent again, not because she demanded it, but because something in her posture commanded attention. Her face was pale, but her eyes were sharp, focused, and burning with restrained fury. "Fear does not give you the right to assault a child," she said evenly. "Fear does not excuse abusing a protected service animal. And fear certainly does not justify bringing a weapon into my courtroom." Karen swallowed hard. "I didn't know it was your daughter," she said, desperation creeping into her voice. That was the wrong thing to say. My wife stepped closer. "You think that matters?" she asked. "You think this would somehow be acceptable if she weren't related to me?" Karen's lips trembled. No," my wife interrupted. "You don't get to speak anymore." She turned to the bailiff. "Remove her from this courtroom. She is to be held without bail pending charges for assault on a minor, aggravated animal cruelty, illegal possession and use of a stun device, and contempt of court." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Karen's head snapped up. "No, please, this is a misunderstanding." The bailiff tightened his grip. As Karen was dragged toward the exit, she locked eyes with me. For the first time since I had met her, there was no arrogance in her gaze. Only terror. The paramedics arrived moments later. They moved quickly, professionally, checking Emily's vitals, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. One of them knelt beside Snowy, carefully assessing him before lifting him onto a stretcher designed for animals. Emily reached out weakly. "Snowy," she whispered. "He's coming with us." The paramedic assured her gently. "I promise." That promise meant everything. As they wheeled Emily out of the courtroom, people stood silently, creating a clear path. Some looked horrified. Others looked ashamed. A few looked furious, not at us, but at what they had just witnessed. The hearing was officially adjourned, but the consequences were just beginning. Outside the courtroom, my wife finally let herself breathe. Her hands shook as she ran them through her hair, the weight of what had just happened crashing down on her all at once. She leaned against the wall, closed her eyes for a moment, and then straightened again. "This isn't over," she said quietly. "Not by a long shot." She was right, because what Karen didn't realize, what she couldn't possibly understand in that moment, was that her actions had crossed multiple legal lines. Federal ones, criminal ones. And once the law starts moving, it doesn't stop easily. As I followed the gurney down the hallway, watching my daughter clutch the edge of the blanket with one hand and reach for Snowy with the other, one thought burned in my mind. This wasn't just about our family anymore. This was about accountability, and the storm Karen had unleashed was only beginning to take shape. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. It didn't stay inside the courthouse. It didn't stay inside police reports. And it definitely didn't stay quiet. Local news vans lined the street outside the hospital before the sun had fully risen. Cameras pointed toward the entrance. Reporters whispered urgently into microphones, rehearsing headlines that would soon spread across the state. HOA official tasers disabled child in courtroom. Service dog attacked in federal court. Judge's daughter assaulted. Suspect in custody. I hated those headlines, not because they were inaccurate, but because they turned my daughter's pain into breaking news. Emily was recovering in a private hospital room, hooked up to monitors, her small chest rising and falling steadily as she slept. Doctors told us she would be okay physically, but they warned us about trauma. Electric shock affects more than nerves. It leaves scars you can't always see. Snowy was in a veterinary ICU across town. That separation nearly destroyed her. Every time Emily woke up, the first thing she asked was the same. Is Snowy okay? I lied the first time. Yes, I said. He's strong. He's fighting. The truth was, Snowy was stable, but barely. The shock had caused muscle damage and cardiac stress. The vet explained it carefully, choosing words that wouldn't crush us, but I could hear the danger between every sentence. My wife hadn't slept. She sat in a chair by Emily's bed, scrolling through legal documents on her tablet, her jaw clenched tight. She wasn't working on our case. She had already recused herself from anything connected to it. But that didn't stop the law from moving. Karen had been formally charged overnight. Not cited, not fined, charged. The district attorney held a press conference before noon. This was not a misunderstanding, he said clearly. This was a violent criminal act against a disabled minor and a protected service animal. The charges are serious, and we intend to pursue them fully. Behind him, a large screen displayed still images taken from courtroom security footage. Karen holding the taser, Karen firing it, Emily screaming, Snowy collapsing. There was no narrative she could hide behind anymore. Social media exploded. People who had never heard of our HOA were suddenly furious. Advocacy groups for disability rights and service animals shared the footage with captions that burned. This is why protections exist. This is what abuse of power looks like. Justice for Emily and Snowy. The HOA released a statement that afternoon. They condemned Karen's actions. They claimed she was acting independently. They immediately terminated her position. Too late. Screenshots surfaced within hours, emails she had sent, complaints she had filed, threats she had made against other residents. Patterns emerged. Victims came forward. An elderly veteran posted online that she had tried to ban his PTSD service dog years earlier. A single mother said Karen had harassed her autistic son. A disabled tenant said Karen had once told her to stop exaggerating. The mask fell completely. Karen was no longer an individual. She was a symbol. By day 3, protests formed outside the courthouse. People held signs. Protect disabled lives. Service dogs are not pets. No more HOA tyrants. I didn't attend. I couldn't. My place was with Emily. She finally got to see Snowy on the 4th day. They wheeled him into her room, carefully, for still attached, bandages wrapped around his chest. The moment she saw him, she burst into tears, not from pain but relief. Snowy, she whispered. He wagged his tail, weakly. That single movement felt like a miracle. My wife stepped out of the room to take a call. When she came back, her expression had changed. She's been denied bail, she said quietly. I let out a breath. I didn't realize I was holding. Karen's attorney had argued panic, self-defense, confusion. The judge, another judge, had shut it down immediately. She is a flight risk and a danger, the ruling stated. She brought a weapon into a courtroom and used it on a child. Karen would remain in custody until trial. Her world was shrinking fast. Her name became toxic. The HOA's insurance provider dropped them. The board resigned under pressure. A federal investigation into HOA abuse practices was launched, all from one act, one moment of unchecked ego. Emily's therapist visited later that week. She spoke gently, explaining trauma, fear responses, nightmares. Emily listened quietly, nodding, holding Snowy's fur in her fingers. I was scared, Emily admitted softly, but Snowy tried to protect me, even when he got hurt. That sentence echoed in my head for days. Karen's preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following month. She would finally stand where she had forced others to stand, without power, without control, without protection. And when that day came, she would learn something she had never understood before. Rules are not weapons, and authority does not make you untouchable. Because when the world finds out who you really are, there is nowhere left to hide. The courthouse looked different the day the trial began, not because the building had changed, but because the power inside it had. Karen walked in wearing a plain gray suit, wrists uncuffed but shoulders hunched, flanked by her attorney. The woman who once strutted through meetings and barked orders at entire neighborhoods now avoided eye contact with everyone around her. No sharp heels, no crossed arms, no arrogance, just silence. The courtroom was packed. Disability rights advocates filled the front rows. Journalists lined the walls. Service dog handlers sat quietly together, their animals lying calmly at their feet, a silent reminder of what this case was really about. Emily sat beside me. She was nervous, but she was brave. Snowy lay at her side, fully recovered now, his white coat brushed and clean, his presence steady and grounding. When people noticed him, they smiled softly. Some wiped away tears. The prosecution didn't waste time. This case, the district attorney began, is not about confusion. It is not about fear. It is about control and what happens when someone believes rules give them permission to harm others. They played the courtroom footage. Again, the sound of the taser filled the room. Emily flinched. I felt her hand tighten around mine. Karen stared straight ahead, her face rigid, her jaw clenched so tight, I thought it might crack. Witnesses followed. The bailiff testified about courtroom security violations. The paramedics described Emily's injuries. The veterinarian explained Snowy's cardiac stress and near-fatal shock. Then came the experts. A federal ADA specialist explained service animal protections in clear, undeniable terms. There was no gray area, no loophole. Karen had violated federal law the moment she targeted Snowy. When it was Emily's turn, the courtroom fell into complete silence. She was sworn in gently, helped to the stand, Snowy staying close enough that she could rest her hand on his back. I was scared, Emily said softly. I didn't know why she was yelling at me. Snowy didn't do anything wrong. He was just trying to help me. She paused, swallowing hard. When she shocked him, I thought he was going to die. I thought it was my fault. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. The defense tried. They argued panic. They argued misunderstanding. They argued that Karen felt threatened. But their words sounded hollow, especially when cross-examined. Threatened by what? The prosecutor asked calmly. A child in a wheelchair? Karen took the stand last. She looked smaller up there. I never meant to hurt anyone, she said, voice shaking. I was just trying to enforce the rules. That sentence sealed her fate. Because the judge leaned forward. Rules exist to protect people, he said, not to terrorize them. When closing arguments ended, the jury didn't deliberate long. 47 minutes. That was all it took. Guilty on all counts. Karen's knees buckled as the verdict was read. Sentencing followed immediately. The judge spoke slowly, deliberately, every word landing like a hammer. You abused your position. You assaulted a disabled child. You tortured a protected service animal. And you showed no remorse until you were held accountable. He paused. This court sentences you to 5 years in state prison, followed by probation, mandatory psychological evaluation, and a lifetime ban from holding any HOA leadership position. A gasp rippled through the room. Karen broke down, crying, begging, apologizing too late. The gavel struck. Case closed. As she was led away, Karen looked back one last time, at Emily, at Snowy, at all the people she once thought she ruled over. No one looked back. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed, microphones were raised, questions shouted. We didn't stop. We just kept walking. Because justice had been served, not loudly, not cruelly, but completely. And for the first time, since that terrible day, we could finally breathe. The weeks after the trial felt strangely quiet. For so long, our lives had been consumed by court dates, medical updates, phone calls, and headlines. Every day carried tension. Every night ended with exhaustion. And then, suddenly, it was over. No more cameras, no more lawyers, no more courtrooms. Just us. Emily's recovery didn't happen all at once. Trauma doesn't disappear the moment justice is served. Some nights she still woke up shaking, her hands clutching the sheets, her breathing shallow. But Snowy was always there, curled up beside her bed, pressing his warm body against her when her heart raced, lifting his head the moment her breathing changed. He had scars too, thin patches of fur that never fully grew back, a slight limp on cold mornings. But to Emily, those scars didn't make him weaker. They made him a hero. One afternoon, as sunlight poured through the living room windows, Emily looked at Snowy and said something I will never forget. "He didn't run away," she said softly, "even when it hurt." That was the moment I realized something important. This story was never just about punishment. It was about courage. Karen went to prison, but the world didn't magically fix itself afterward. What changed was awareness. What changed was accountability. New laws were proposed in our state to increase penalties for interference with service animals. HOA boards across the county revised their policies overnight. Training programs were introduced. Complaints that had once been ignored were suddenly taken seriously. People who had been silent for years found their voices. We received letters, hundreds of them, from parents of disabled children, from veterans with service dogs, from elderly residents who had been bullied into silence. They didn't write to congratulate us. They wrote to say, "Thank you for standing up." Emily returned to school slowly. The first day back, Snowy walked beside her through the hallway. Students stopped and stared, not with fear but respect. Some teachers wiped their eyes. One little boy saluted Snowy like he was a soldier. Emily smiled. Not a scared smile. A proud one. My wife returned to the bench months later. When she put her robe back on, she did so with a deeper understanding of what justice truly means, not just laws and sentences, but protection, dignity, and balance. One evening, Emily asked a question that caught us both off guard. "Do you think she's sorry?" she asked. My wife thought for a moment before answering. "I think she's sorry she was stopped," she said gently. "But being sorry and being accountable aren't the same thing." Emily nodded, absorbing that in her own way. Snowy rested his head on her lap. Life didn't go back to how it was before. It became something stronger. We stopped assuming people would always do the right thing and started believing more deeply in standing up when they don't. And that's the truth people often forget. Karma isn't magic. It's consequence. It's the moment when power meets limits, when cruelty meets law, when arrogance meets reality. Karen thought rules made her untouchable. She was wrong, because rules don't protect people who abuse them. People protect people. And sometimes justice wears a robe, sometimes it walks on four legs, and sometimes it speaks through the courage of a child who refuses to be silent. If the story moved you, if it made you angry, if it reminded you why disability rights and service animals matter, backhand index pointing right, like this video so more people can see it. Backhand index pointing right. Subscribe to the channel for real stories with real consequences. Backhand index pointing right. And comment justice if you believe no one is above the law, because silence protects abuse. And stories like this, they protect the innocent. Thank you for listening.